Hi, and welcome to the Adoption's Truth podcast. Our goal is to spread the awareness of the tie between adoption and mental health. Many people are affected by adoption, whether you're the adoptee, adopting parent, birth parent, or maybe even a friend or family member. We hope to continue to educate and help people understand how important mental health is when it comes to adoption. Enjoy the podcast.
Hey guys, just want to give you a quick little precursor heading into this episode. This is not a typical interview episode. This is much more of just a very genuine, deep felt conversation that I had. I just wanted to at least let you know who I'm having the conversation with, because I don't do any type of formal introduction in this. We started having a conversation, we ran with it, and I couldn't be more proud and excited to have you guys hear this. And I just wanted to say thank you to Oleg. He did an incredible job. I learned so much. I took so much away from this conversation that I am excited to continue to apply it to my life. So I hope you guys can do the same. But it is with Oleg, who is the Overcoming Odds nonprofit foundation founder of it. Definitely go over and check that out. It is overcomingodds.today. But enjoy the podcast.
Let me re-ask you. You know, you sent me your whole outline, and I'm happy to go through it. But let me ask you a better question. What are you curious about right now? Like, what are you truly craving to know an answer to?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I would say it's like a multitude of things, but
Okay.
it's really comes down to I love to get people's viewpoints on their situation and their story, and then how it, especially with this, how it connects with the mental health, and if they've also have battled mental health, and how to continue to kind of help other people in that area. Really, it's like
okay. Let me ask you a question beyond that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So right now we're talking at broad level of mental
Mm-hmm.
health. Give me a specific thing that you're actually curious about. Is it overcoming depression? Is it overcoming financial instability? Is it overcoming anxiety? Like, give me a moment when you really felt it, and allow me a chance to relate.
Yeah, I would go with the biggest one that's big for me, that I always have a fascination with other people that have gone through similar situations, but it's very focused on identity, like searching for identity.
So who are you? Okay.
Identity and life purpose really are big.
Okay.
I mean, anxiety, depression, I feel like, that's also very big and important regardless. But identity searching was a big one. I've been reading a couple of books on adoption and all that, and it really hit home for me personally when she got into, adoptees face a lot of, with depression, with anxiety. It stems back to this identity of you're searching, you're constantly looking for yourself in the end. You're constantly, and people face it all the time, but they were saying, with adoptees, with people that have gone through foster care, it's this extra level of anxiety, and it can lead to depression, of searching for yourself, because you're also searching for your birth parents. You're searching for people you know, and you cannot connect it. And it can drive you crazy, and I knew it drove me crazy, and so that's kind of where it led me to wanting to find people that maybe have battled that, or battled something I haven't battled myself.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is the question of where do I belong, and why do I belong there? So it's funny that you say that, because in 5 days on Saturday, we're going to be hosting a seminar in Austin that's called Where Do You Belong?
You're kidding.
True story. And it's going to be three speakers, myself included. All have been adopted, and each one will be talking on a specific element that relates to the larger theme of belonging. So Tanya's talking about, her theme is you are enough. So how she was able to come to terms with knowing that she was enough in life, even though her parents essentially abandoned her. Josh is talking about the fact that he broke his down into 3 aspects, and it was his topic. I'm looking at it right now. His topic is seeing yourself as you really are, And during it, he breaks it down into 3, and that is what you thought you could be, what you were allowed to be, and what you choose to be. So it's
Are you speaking on that as well?
I'm speaking on seeking connection, and so my topic is really about authenticity and the power of your story, and how I was able to define authenticity for myself through recognizing different stages of my life and being able to reflect on each one. So I've actually been able to identify each one of the letters with a lesson. So A, accepting your past, U, understanding that you are unique, T, telling your story, H, hearing yourself, so the inner dialogue that you have within you that constantly tells you certain things and overcoming self-doubts, negative thoughts, negative feelings. But the last letter of it all, of this structure called authentic, is C, which is connecting with other people, which I believe is the biggest component to defining and refining purpose in life, because it really does come down to, you know what you know, but there's also a lot that you don't know. And the only way to figure that out is to be able to open yourself up to other people's perspectives and opinions and views of the world. And so I'm a huge believer in connecting with other people to help you essentially find or recreate the world.
Do you mind me asking why, I think how to word it correctly, why you think, or do you think, or I guess, yeah, why do you think adoptees or people that have gone through similar situations like that maybe struggle with identity or like life purpose, or battle through those types of things? I mean, I think accepting your past is huge, and I think that might be maybe the first obstacle. I know it's still something I struggle with.
It is.
You know why that would be.
Accepting your past is like an onion. There are multiple layers to it. Accepting your past, when looking at it from a broader standpoint of view, it seems simple, but your past is a combination of thousands and thousands of events and people. And so as part of my acceptance of my journey in my past, I've had to also understand who are the people that I need to accept, what are the situations that I needed to embrace for what they were. And so it really came down to understanding what I was capable of at that particular time, because you also have to understand that you are meant to go through different chapters of your life. And one chapter may give you the set of tools and skills to be able to process a element from your past, but not the other, simply because you don't have the informational or emotional intelligence to go through it. So to answer your question, I think the reason why there is an identity crisis, and this goes outside of the fields of adoption or foster care, because and the way that you can determine that is simply ask people, who are you? Not the job that you do, not the way that you pay your bills, not the person you spend your time with, but who are you? What makes you you? What makes you unique? And that's the hardest question that people have time answering.
Well, because I think a lot of people attach, like you just said in the beginning there, not where you were.
Job descriptions, exactly.
Big,
and those aren't really identifiers, because those sometimes you had to go into because time got tough or whatever else happened. So to answer yours, I don't think there is a direct answer, but I think some of the factors that relate to that is the fact that they haven't accepted certain parts of their past. Neglect and abandonment is also a huge thing, because whenever that happens to you, and if that happens to you again, then you begin to question your self-worth. How could this happen to me? Why am I the only one? I can't believe that I'm the only one, type of thing. So those are the questions you start to ask yourself. Yeah. So I've recently come to a conclusion that, this was maybe a year or so ago, that instead of asking myself those questions when I face adversity, I started to ask myself the question of, is it happening to me or is it happening for me?
Wow.
and it helped me redefine every form of adversity. Yeah, it's all about reframing and how you look at a situation. I'm a huge believer that you always live in the abundance of and the lack of. It all depends on which one you choose to put your time and energy towards. And you can find answers to both. You can find answers to lack of right now because you don't have $1 million.
Yeah.
You can find an answer to abundance of because you have created new friendships and relationships in your life.
Now, question to go back on when you were jumping into the part of the past and accepting that, as far as, because that could be I think for a lot of people, very daunting, for lack of better words, but daunting area to focus on. Would you say, I know for me personally, and it's kind of even more challenging because sometimes you don't reach out to the people or even get the, hey, I'm sorry for here's what happened to you. But it's almost like forgiveness, but you're forgiving them without communication almost. Would you say that's a big part in that, kind of like learning that forgive for the past, but let yourself, your brain and your mind focus on the future and letting go of that?
Well, to answer the question of communication, is the communication is happening without a doubt. It comes down to, do you need to validate yourself to them, and do you need to validate your apology to them in person? The communication is happening regardless. It's happening internally. And that's the hardest part, and that's one of the reasons why we as humanity have a hard time accepting change, because change is hard. Change requires work. Change requires you to sit down with yourself, your own thoughts, your own feelings, and work through it. It requires you to go into even deeper, and that is being able to take a step back and acknowledge that there are things that are meant to be changed in your life. And most of us don't want to do that because not even the time and effort it requires, but it requires you to take a step into a direction where you have to acknowledge that you are imperfect. We're all working with our imperfections on a daily basis. But it's the acknowledgement of that and the possibility that you may not be living a perfect life that scares us the most.
Yeah, and I feel like change is such I feel like it could be like categorized in with age with a lot of people, where they say,
yes,
you know, oh, well, you're in your 20s, that's where you change the most, and you know, okay, 30s, now you're kind of set in your ways, and then 40s and on, you're done, like you're never going to change your mind again. But I feel like the culture, at least now, is turning a little bit more to people are getting a little more open-minded with things here and there. And I've noticed even with, you know, older people, my dad, for instance, who's, you know, now just turning in his 60s, and he's been very started open-minded. He started to get more open-minded. Things starts, you know, instead of closing off after hearing one thing, he goes, well, let me really hear this out and start to understand where this person may be coming from, or changing ways that he used to do things. Yeah. Where do you think, I feel like it's one of those things that it just comes down to like, well, you just need to jump in and do it. But do you have any like tips? I mean, even for myself, I'm still transitioning, you know, changing, but like for people that struggle with change or struggle with having a hard conversation to help get over something or forgive something. But yeah, for anybody that maybe is struggling with taking a step, is there any type of tips or things maybe that you did to help yourself in going through changes?
Well, I think the first part of it all is I had to recognize that change was a process. And there's no, it's not overnight. There's no exact spot where you're going to get to and it's going to hit you as far as, whoa, change. This is it. It helps you redefine a lot of the elements that you look at, because you start to look at things such as the journey. The journey is the destination, not the other way around. It's you never actually get there. And that's the coolest part, I think, about any sort of change, any sort of progress, life in general, is that it's evolving target that you constantly go towards, but you never actually hit it. The things that you accomplish along the way as what you thought were the final targets are just milestones. Change is its personal development. It's being able to accept the fact that you're about to go on a journey. And we all face it in different forms and different shapes. One of the most recent ones that I've come to when I was starting this organization about 1.5 years ago to 2 years is when you start a business, there's so many different things that you have to go through. One of them is being able to have enough money to actually run the operation.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was starting this off, getting it off the ground, and about 3 to 4 months in, I didn't have any money to pay just anything. I didn't have enough money to pay the website hosting. And you know what one of the craziest feelings that you experience on this journey, or that I've experienced on this journey, is going to my mailbox and taking out the mail. And one of the letters was from my bank. And it said, your account will be closed within 45 days if you don't turn your current balance into a positive.
Wow.
My checking was at 0.0. My savings was at negative $86. My available credit was $3.32. Now, I could have said, F that. I'm going to give up my business. I'm going to go get a job. But then I really had to look at myself and say, why did I start this to begin with? Did I start this to make money, or did I start this to make an impact and change one person's life? And those are the moments that really kept me humble and really helped me understand that I started this to make an impact. This was not a way to make money. And that's where I took that letter, I ripped it in half, and I threw it in the trash can in the mailroom of my apartment. And I continued on. And there's so many other things that you experience along the journey. Another most recent one was we're hosting an event, a seminar in Philadelphia called Path to Resilience last year. And as part of putting together that event, one of the things that I had to accomplish was to find, I think it was 3 to 5 rooms donated by some of the hotels for some of the speakers that were flying in.
Yeah.
And it took me 124 calls before I got my first yes.
Wow.
124 hotels I had to call before I finally got into yes. By the time I hit 50, I started to reframe my question. And instead of being direct and asking them, I would ask them and I would immediately follow up with, what would make you want to say yes? What do you have to hear to be able to make that decision?
Mm-hmm.
And people started to become honest. Well, we need media publicity. Can you get that? Absolutely. Can you mention this on X, Y, and Z blog? Sure. So it really helped me better understand what they need. That's why I always ask this question of any possible partner, anyone that I ever come in contact with, or I try my best to do so, is when I pose my ask, I understand that you haven't asked me yet. And so I ask you of, how can I add you value? What can I bring to you? And you'll be surprised that most times the answers that you will receive are the things that you can actually help them almost immediately.
Yeah. Well, it was the first question you had, and I mean, it's been great. But to pony back off what you said a little bit earlier that I loved was going into that story and talking about that adversity that you just faced in the 3 months and everything. And the beautiful thing is that you're here. I mean, look what happened, and I think so many people are, and that's part of change too, is hitting that roadblock and then, okay, let me go back to this other thing that was more comfortable.
Yes.
Now, like, this is getting scary now, or what am I going to do? I can't do it. I'm done. Let me go over here. I think that's where not only, I mean, it can, in the end, it always works out. Usually you're okay, but that's also where you can even change the most for the better.
And the reason why it works out is because you choose to look at the situation as if the situation had worked out. So think about it this way. If you know that the end of the road is that it is going to work out one way or another, because you choose to look at that situation in that manner. So what if you chose to look at the situation you are in right now as a whole other way? You're experiencing adversity. Well, understand that adversity is part of the learning. Change happens in times when you are uncomfortable. So why not put yourself in situations that are making you uncomfortable? Why not live that life right now? If you know that at the end of the day, it is going to work out. But it's going to work out because you are actively choosing right now to view it that way. So take that next step. Take that next step now. If you know that if you know that majority of your life is learning how to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations, then put yourself in uncomfortable situations and find ways to be comfortable in those.
Exactly. I think it was, we were talking earlier and we brought up Joe Rogan, and there's that, I remember he said something similar to that regard of, we grow the most when we're in an uncomfortable situation. Like if you go back and you think of your life and you think of, okay, well, I started to learn to ride a bike at age 4, and you were very uncomfortable and very scared.
Oh, yeah.
But you learned, you grew, you learned a new lesson, you learned a new skill, and like everything, you go from first grade to second grade, you're scared and you're uncomfortable. Second to third, like everything in life that you usually get uncomfortable. Like I'm not a huge fan of flying, but as I've done it more, I've got more comfortable, and I started to train my brain to realize, well, if I don't fly and I'm not comfortable with it, I'm never going to be able to get places that I want to go and do things that I know I want to do. So if I don't learn and train my brain to get comfortable, and the more you do it, you get comfortable. But I mean, I couldn't agree more that putting yourself in uncomfortable situations is always usually for the better.
And even with something like that, when you think about flying, is even though you got yourself comfortable to the act of flying, there is still an element, at least for me, that I work on and I'm not comfortable in. And that is each time turbulence is different.
Yeah.
You may be on a flight that you feel like you're dropping 20,000 feet, even though you just changed your altitude by 3 feet.
It's always fun.
Or you could be in a time where it's a perfect flight, and then you hit that one bump towards the end, and you're on the edge of your seat.
Makes your heart drop a little bit.
It makes your heart drop because it's unexpected. You don't know when it's almost like you're sitting in a position expecting it to happen now, and you're asking yourself the question of, now? Now?
When's it going to happen? When's it going to happen?
Now? And then a half hour later it happens, and it catches you off guard. Same thing in life. You get into a new environment, go into a new city, go into a coffee shop you've never been to before. Same exact feelings. You are feeling uncomfortable because you don't know how people are going to look at you. You don't know if people are going to judge you by what you order. You don't know if you're going to come to that counter, swipe your credit card, and it's all of a sudden going to say declined. There's so much you don't know. And it's not even because you don't have enough money in your account. What if the bank is experiencing a problem? You have no control over that, but they have control over your funds. So it's just, I think it's accepting what you know and accepting the unknown of life, and just being able to really embrace those moments for what they are.
Do you think you find yourself, now that you've gotten very comfortable in the mindset of being uncomfortable, do you think you find yourself reaching for uncomfortable now at this point, where you've gotten yourself so comfortable with being in an uncomfortable situation, knowing that it's going to work out, knowing that you're going to persevere from it, regardless if it ends well or it ends great or it ends bad? But do you think you find yourself now actually seeking uncomfortable situations to continue to expand your skills and your knowledge in different areas?
Every day, without a doubt. I write that on my to-do list.
Be uncomfortable today.
Being uncomfortable today, and I always add at least 2 to 3 different tasks that are making me extremely uncomfortable. I remember one of the most recent ones was I was encouraged by a friend of mine to do vlogs, 1-minute segments where I would share on a particular viewpoint or dissect a question that I was going after, such as the ones I've shared with you at the very beginning of this. Mm-hmm. What are you the most scared of in life? How do you view your parents? Who are your parents? Who are you? And it made me just that much more aware of where I was and where I wanted to be. I think as you develop skills, your life is not any different. It has to go through a form of change, a form of progress. So I'm constantly seeking out situations where I can put myself in uncomfortable spots because I know those are the things that are going to give me the greatest lessons, the greatest takeaways, and the greatest growth. If I choose to look at each one as a growing opportunity. Now, you can do the same exact thing, put yourself in uncomfortable situations, and not use those as the golden nuggets for change, for growth. And that's where you get into situations where you are not able to identify what you did, and you start to ask yourself the question of, I can't believe this happened to me. How could I have done that? But if you go into it with an intention of growing, then that's what it's all about. Every single day, and I don't remember the person that actually first said this, but there was one person that I listened to. He has a podcast, and he had mentioned how every day he does at least one thing that makes him uncomfortable, whether that's writing with his left hand, standing on his head, going in the middle of a sidewalk, and just laying down in front of a crowded street. And it just made me think of, like, why am I not doing the same stuff? If I'm all about growth, if I'm all about living out my true story and showing other people that you can do the same thing with your own story, that your story is unique, your story is full of beautiful things that I may not be able to understand because I'm not living your story. So help me understand what your story is about. Who are you? What are the things that you really align with at the end of the day? And just like we said before, it's those moments that really help you realize who you are and build up character.
Mm-hmm. Do you use the same mindset because I know we tackled a lot of dealing with uncomfortable situations and putting yourself in uncomfortable situations, and somewhere along the line, you jumped across the word control a little bit back, and it made me think of, I think you said control mindset or one of those two. They kind of tied together for me, and it made me think of when you don't have control of a situation, you know, and especially, I mean, that really jumps all the way back to being adopted, or when you're a child and you're put in these situations and you're not, you know, you don't have say over who you get as as your parents when you're adopted, and all these things that, you know, and later in life you deal with so many obstacles that are making you uncomfortable, but you don't even have control over. And I guess it teeters a little bit on the flight for sure. You know, flying, you're out of control. But for those situations, do you kind of use the same mindset of, in the end, you know, it's making you uncomfortable, but you're gonna feel better in it? Or how do you deal with something that can be an uncontrollable, where you don't know how somebody's gonna respond to having a hard conversation with them? You don't know how this is gonna happen or this is gonna unfold. How do you deal with the mindset in that regard?
Well, I think it comes down to living with the known and the unknown. There are things that you know about who you are and what your world is, and then there are things that you don't know about those things. So it really just comes down to being comfortable with who you are and what you know. If I know what I'm sharing with you is the pure truth of who I am at the core of my being, then that's the only thing I can control. How you react to it, whether you judge me, whether you compare, that's entirely up to you. That is in alignment with who you are. And so a lot of the behaviors and a lot of the things that we encounter in today's world is you have no control over, because it's the other person.
The person's,
they have their own life. They have their own viewpoints. They have their own world in their mind. I think that's one of the most fascinating things that I've recently come to, is that, think about life, right? I live in my own world, which is composed of thousands and thousands of different variations. You live in a world of your own, which is also made up of thousands and thousands of different variations. But yet we still somehow are able to come to terms and align different aspects of our worlds to be able to have a conversation like this. How does that happen? How is it that two people that are living in two separate worlds, literally the things I'm thinking of right now, I guarantee you are not thinking of them. The things they imagine on a daily basis are probably not the same things that you imagine on a daily basis. But yet, both of those things impact the actions that you take during the day and the world that you choose to live in. So it comes down to, for me, it really comes down to understanding that there's what I know and there's what I don't know. And it didn't make sense for me to be bothered by the elements that I didn't know, because I had no control over them. And even though I might have been able to influence some of them due to the things that I've said or I've done, but I can't control the response of that.
Yeah, and it sounds like it comes down a lot to really knowing who you are in the core. And again, to totally pony all the way back on the beginning, but I absolutely loved what you said about knowing who you are in the core. And this is something I actually wrote down, I think it was last week, and I really liked it, but it was about knowing who you are. And it's not, like you said, it's not the job you have, it's not the car you drive, it's who are you?
What are your values? What are your beliefs?
Exactly. And it's really fascinating how much that correlates with all your other mindset. And I think a lot of it falls back on society and kind of the world we've almost built as a society of this, when you meet somebody, oh, nice, well, what do you do? It's not, we wait so long to figure out who a person is. We, as a society, have already built this, well, what's your job? Oh, that's cool. Like, well, what kind of car do you? Oh, that's cool. Like, what sports do you? Oh, that's cool. Like, we never get. Now, mind you, if you ask somebody who are your core values, it could go one of two ways. Like, it could be a very deep question that usually, but that's something we've built. We've made it an uncomfortable question.
So let me give you an example. Today, I was calling different businesses to get donations for sandwiches for our upcoming event here in Austin on June 15th. I called about 10 different businesses before I hit this one. And for each one of the 10, I would just ask the question. I would tell them what we're about, and they would say, email us and we'll get back to you. So I called this one sandwich shop, and I'm speaking to one of the employees at first, and she keeps asking me questions of how many people, when is the event, what is the organization about, and I would provide all the answers. And she said, well, let me ask my manager. So the manager gets on the phone and he says, I don't usually take these calls because we get hundreds and hundreds of these calls, but I wanted to hear more. 45 minutes later, I'm still talking to him, to subjects that are completely unrelated to the original ask that I posed. We're talking about his parents. We're talking about the language of humanity. We're talking about why we take certain things for granted, such as people. We take a lot of the items that are familiar to us for granted, I believe, in my life. I used to, and I still do to a degree. You walk into a room, you see a chair. You walk into another room, you see a chair. what I thought of was I saw a chair. I stopped caring about the design and the uniqueness of the chair. Same way when it came to people. I go into a grocery store, I see a person.
Wow.
I go into an office, I see a person. Oh, just a person. But they're different people. Different roles, different purpose, different meaning. So I started to ask this business owner about his parents, because he started to tell me that he doesn't usually take the calls because he gets so many of them. And I just started a natural dialogue. Well, why did you take this call? Because I had a connection to X, Y, and Z. And so I would just ask him questions. And we got to a point where we started to talk about his family and how a lot of the things that his parents brought him up with are actually the cornerstones behind how he runs his business.
Mm.
And so I started to ask him questions of, well, how do you remember your parents? What do you think are some of the skills that you've been able to identify within yourself that they've passed on to you? And we ended the call with saying how you don't really have conversations like these.
Mm.
Mind you, I've never met the person ever. This was my first time picking up the phone and talking to him.
Yeah.
So how is it that I was able to have a truly authentic conversation with him on such a deep level where neither of us have ever met each other? And the way that I think I would approach that is that both of us were living in a world where we were true to who we were.
Yeah.
And we were able to sense that with one another through energy, through our approach. And so what you had mentioned with the fact that we have this almost a checklist of questions that we go through on a daily basis. You go through a grocery store, and this happens to me more often than not. You get asked, how are you? I answer, and then I ask them back. And then I notice that they're asking the same question to the next customer. There's no intention.
It's almost a little, I hate using the word robotic, but
It's automation. I've done the same thing, and I still
and
do
you
the
know
same
if you're
thing
having
for
a
certain
bad
parts.
day, you'll still sometimes say, "Oh, I'm good, thanks. How are you?" Like
Exactly.
you know that happens all the time.
Exactly. And we all go through those days. That's the most important part. We are all fighting battles every single day. So once you accept that, it allows us to better understand that we're all going through things. We all have odds to overcome, no pun intended.
I like that.
But we all have them on a daily basis, personal, professional, whatever it may be. Every single one of us has those odds against them. So it really comes down to, well, do I look at them and do I acknowledge that there are things that I'm going through and other people are going through similar journeys? Or do I live in a world where I put myself as I'm the only one and no one else is having any problems? Reframing your mindset. Now that takes time, don't get me wrong. I didn't wake up knowing this. I didn't wake up one day and saying, whoa, I'm just going to look at every situation as if that's not the possibility. If I don't have money, I'm going to somehow make myself believe, not the fact that I have money, but more so that I'm rich in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time. It takes practice. It starts with your inner dialogue. What do you tell yourself? Do you encourage yourself? Do you choose to look at things differently? It starts with a choice. I choose to do this because I believe it is going to bring me that.
Yeah, actually, to pony off of that, I'm sorry, I don't want to keep you forever. I'm sorry.
No, keep going.
But,
are we recording, by the way?
Oh, perfect.
Are we?
Oh, yeah, we're recording. I'm sorry. I thought you said you've been recording. I was like, oh, cool, that's awesome.
I love it. Okay.
No, I do want to ask, and I thought you were just going to say it there, but and I'm sure some of it is just the slow process of changing the mind and the mindset. But is there anything that you've also done in regards to getting better in that area of the mindset? As far as, like, I know for me, one thing I try to start to praise more is, and it's hard to do it every day, it really is, but meditation. You know, I try to meditate almost every day, at least get in 5 to 10. And, you know, I wish I could say I do it every day. There's days I don't, but I notice when I do, it's like one thing in clarity that just gives me so much peace of mind. And I know there's so many other ways for people out there to do that, but was there anything specifically for you that you did, or was it just a mindset thing that you started in a podcast, heard in a podcast, and then kind of just you ran with it? Or
I think there are a lot of different factors. One of the first things that I did was actually meditation.
Oh, okay.
And I heard that from an episode of Tim Ferriss, and then also a lot of my friends at the time were practicing meditation, and so they got me into it, and I started to do it. And I actually still remember my first time. I was sitting in the room, and I had no clue what I was doing, and a friend of mine sat in front of me, and she did a guided meditation where she spoke the different parts of my body that I needed to focus on with my eyes closed. And I remember opening my eyes after and just going through this little transformation. My energy shifted. I became relaxed and calm and wanted to take on the day. And so from that point on, I was hooked into development and just wanting to do all of these different things that would help my body and my mind. So I started to read books. I read Think and Grow Rich 2 times and 4-Hour Workweek and all these other books. I went vegan.
Wow.
And
really?
I went vegan. I went to my fridge and I pulled the trash can and I dumped everything off all those shelves. Now, this is kind of extreme. I don't recommend that to many people because then you're all of a sudden left with no food and you're having to do research as you're hungry, which is just not the best combination.
And buying bags of spinach as you're continually trying to know what you can.
Exactly. What else to eat? Where else do you get protein? So I did that.
Yep.
And I just continued to invest in myself. Every opportunity that I thought was somewhat, quote unquote, alternative, I gave it a shot. But at the end of the day, what I've learned through those experiences is that it made me a lot more open-minded to different events, to different people. And that's where I said at the beginning that it is through connecting with other people that I've been able to define and refine my purpose or my existence. It really was that. It was almost like I had to go through all the other things because they were building blocks to this bigger thing. And it was being able to open up to others and accepting people for where they are in life and identifying value that they bring to you at times where they may not be able to speak directly to you and say, I am going to bring you this value. This is what I am good for to you. You have a choice in identifying the roles that people play in your life. And this goes back not only to friends, not only to people like myself who you haven't met, but it goes back to even parents. It goes back to looking at the things that you were born into. I make this joke with some of my friends that when you are born, why is it that you start with 1? Why can't I be born at 25 or 35? What is the significance behind that number? What is the significance behind the roles of mom and dad that you are born into? When you think about it throughout your life, I'm sure you have met figures that were the exact definitions of a mom and a dad that weren't necessarily your biological parents. So it just question your own existence. Don't just be there, but actually reflect on your life and the purpose and the essence of why you are here. I read this beautiful quote the other day, and it was talking about the meaning in life. and how it really boils down to being able to create your own meaning. And the quote was, "Life has no meaning. Each of us has meaning, and we bring it to life." It is a waste to be asking the question of what is the meaning of life when you are the answer. You get to define your meaning.
It's really good. I like that. That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
So going back to purpose, I would say instead of asking yourself, well, what is the purpose? Why can't you just say the purpose is just to be? This is the purpose. The purpose for you is to be and add value in the way that you think you can, whether that's through service of other people. And when you think about it, like that's what ends up happening for most of us, is we add value by serving others.
mm-hmm.
Form of a podcast, form of a job, cooking for others, playing sports with others, doing anything that involves being around another human being or a living thing. You do the same thing for animals, plants, anything that has life. You are serving others. Whether you choose to look at it that way or not is entirely up to you. But I believe that you're always serving others.
Yeah, that's actually really funny because that's what I feel like has always been, with my purpose is serving others. But then what's funny is that I've always tried to steer my job into that, and that's because I've tied for so long my mindset of my job is the definition of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that does fall back on society and could fall back on, peers and family and friends and what they say about, everything and, the buildup of who are you going to be when you grow up. I mean, that's one of the most common questions you get as a kid. Well, what job are you going to have when you get older? It's like, well, why does that define who I am? Whether I'm a firefighter or I, pick up the trash, like, why does that define?
And very, very rarely does that question get followed up with a why. Why do you want to be a firefighter? Why do you want to do this? And then beyond that, why do you want to do that? Because it goes back to, I think, automation and also people are at different chapters of their lives. Therefore, we are only comfortable with certain pieces of information. Not everyone is in this mindset of where they want to be uncomfortable. When you pose a question to someone that makes them feel uncomfortable, you will not get an honest answer.
Usually it's sugar-coated.
Sugar-coated, exactly. It's sugar-coated with an answer that they feel comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with sharing your story. Think about how many of us actually live a story that's true to who we are. How many of us choose to live that story to help other people live that story? How many of us choose to publicly share that story? That's one of the scariest things, is to publicly share an aspect of who you are. Because there's the unknown. Are people going to judge me? How are my family members going to look at me? Will I still be a part of their family after I share this aspect of who I am? Those are some deep questions that you have to get through. But you have no way of knowing it until you do it.
It's an eternal battle.
So the only thing you can do is do it. Exactly. It's not that you can ask yourself that question and you're going to get an answer. You have to do it through action. There's a phrase that I'm sure you've come to in your life. It is knowledge is power. I used to believe that for a very long time. But then it just made sense to me that knowledge is not power. Knowledge with action is power. Knowing
all the
something,
knowledge in the world, but
exactly.
you're not acting.
Knowing something is entirely different from being able to act on that thing. The experience that you gain through that is entirely different.
Absolutely. Oh, that's good. It's good stuff. Oh, well, thank you so much. I seriously appreciate you coming on and just elaborating in so many. I think you taught me more than I don't know. You just taught me so much. I feel like I learned so much.
I appreciate you giving me this chance. Whatever I can do to help you, help whatever the work you're doing, just don't ever hesitate to reach out. The way that I want to conclude this episode is the way that I always started it off. Stay curious. Stay curious in what you truly want to know answers to. Don't ask questions that you aren't intentional asking about. Don't ask questions that you don't truly want to know answers to, or that you have found a form of an answer to. Be curious about those areas. Really trying to understand, what do I want to know in this particular moment of my life? And that's what really gives the best possible value to anyone else who's listening to that, because it makes them think of a question that they want to know an answer to.